Welcome everyone. It's Frank from Talking God's Grace. I just finished one topic on the Watchtower study. So today, though, I want to talk about the Divine Chessboard, unraveling the betrayal of Jesus Christ. Yeah, I've been looking back at Jesus' life, and I'm going to be doing that over a period of time. And there's something very interesting that happens at Jesus' trial. But before we go into that, as I was doing this, I didn't realize this. Maybe you knew. I didn't know this. I know there's scores of prophecies from Moses to the prophets that talk about a Messiah, the Messiah to come. And I knew there was in the hundreds. It ranges in the hundreds, and it's about 300. I had to just check again. It's about 300 plus prophetic statements on one person. Now, the chances of that happening on one person is impossible. I don't say it. This is what everyone else says. It's impossible. They say that, for example, they say even 8 prophetic statements made in advance and to happen in a person in their lifetime is 1 to the power of 17. 48 is 1 to the power of 157. 300, they say it's virtually impossible. What I'm looking at is Jesus' last day, basically, just the surrounding period of that week. But did you know in one day, 27 prophecies were fulfilled in just one day in Jesus' life? Now, I was thinking about it, I think that, and this was hundreds of years in advance. The probability of that taking place it is impossible, guys. But what I got out of it was this: that he is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. He was the one foretold, and from different people, hundreds of years in advance, right? 500 years plus in advance, talking about this one character, this one person. And there are things that are happening in Jesus' life from his birth to his death, especially around his death, surrounding his death, that they can't be rigged. They can't be fixed. And this is why you can trust Jesus Christ as the Messiah. If you're a person that doesn't believe in Jesus, I tell you what, that alone should just sort of tell you that that he is the Messiah. I'm actually going to upload the 27 prophecies and events that happened to him in that day on my website. I'll put it in the description below so you can get a chance to have a look at it. Some say there's 29. If you can find the extra two, maybe put it back on my video, because I haven't got a comment section set up in my website as yet. But today's topic, I'm going to look at some of the things that happened regarding Jesus. And as you look at this, guys, I'm going to tell you, it's going to blow your mind away, because you're going to see that these religious leaders were very smart, but there were things happening that even they couldn't control, right? And no one's pushing or pulling anyone, but all things happened as was prophesied, even if they didn't want it to happen. Because I used to think myself, why would Satan and the enemy, why would they want to kill him when it was going to undo their power, right? Because that's what Jesus came to do, not only to save humanity, but also break up the works of the devil. And he's got no hold on a believer now, right? Jesus wins, you win when you believe, right? He can't touch you, according to the book of John. So let's have a look at this conspiracy. As this conspiracy unfolds to betray Jesus, we're going to look at some of these strategic moves by the religious leaders. I'm not going to go into all the religious leaders. There's Annas, there's Caiaphas, Antipas, was it? No, what was it? Herod, right? Herod Antipas, I think. And then we got Pilate. We're not going to go into these characters. That's another topic for another day. We're going to have several of these little topics, conversations coming up. But we're going to see how Judas, right? He was obviously a very he was a follower of Jesus, and he was, I think, a bit of a zealous person for the nation of Israel as well. I think he wanted to see an overturning of the Roman yoke, and I think he maybe, he was a clever guy, very clever guy. I mean, Jesus put him in charge of the money box. He was the treasurer. Why didn't he put Matthew as a charge of treasury? I mean, he was an accountant, but instead he used Judas, right? So he was quite a cluey guy, Judas, I'd assume. But we're going to see that with this betrayal of Jesus by Judas, we're also going to see something about the religious leaders, how they had no compassion. These guys were stone hard, cold killers, a bit like Pilate. They were just out to look out for themselves and get Jesus. So keep in mind 2 Corinthians 3:14 that their minds were with a veil on. And so even though these men, and we're going to read some of these texts, they had certain ideas how to get rid of Jesus and when and whatever, because there was a veil covering their minds, they actually couldn't understand or read these prophetic statements. They could read some, but it seems like they were missing who Jesus was, right? Because of this veil, according to 2 Corinthians 3:14. They didn't get it. But here's a couple of texts I want to look at. Matthew 26:3-5. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest named Caiaphas. So notice who's gathering? The chief priests and the elders of the people. All the top brass, right? With Caiaphas, the high priest. And they plotted to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. Now, can you imagine this? They're out for him. They want to kill him. It just tells you there, right? But they were saying, notice this, not during the festival, because, or otherwise, a riot might occur among the people. Now, you understand what they're saying? Yeah, okay. We don't want to get Jesus now. I mean, he's already got popularity, right? He's already got the crowd behind him. They're thinking to themselves, this is a terrible time. We've got the Passover coming up. Certainly, we don't want to do that. I mean, remember what Jesus, he's the Passover lamb. We don't want to kill him during the Passover. That would be a mistake. Right? Okay, so we're getting behind the scenes discussions that these guys are doing, right? This is their plan. Mark 14:10-11 says, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12. That was their plan. Now we get to Mark 14. Now here's a piece of a puzzle which they weren't expecting, but they were certainly grateful that happened. Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went off to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. They were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money. And they began to seeking how to betray him at an opportune time. See, they were looking for an opportune time. So the opportune time wasn't during the festival. That's not the time, right? That's not the time. They've already said, we don't want to do it then. So they're thinking, okay, how can we do this? When? But we got now Judas in play. Okay, he's come on board to betray Jesus. Now, Judas might have other ideas, right? He may not be fixated about killing Jesus. He's only interested in betraying Jesus. Maybe he's trying to provoke Jesus, right? Get him to overthrow Rome or perform some miracles or whatever. Who knows what his thinking is? But he was way off base. I mean, Jesus goes to calls him eventually the son of destruction, and I think he calls him even Satan somewhere along the line. So Judas isn't a good guy either. Some try to, portray him as a weak or as somebody that, was misled, misdirected. Maybe he was. Maybe he had, disillusionment. Maybe obviously he didn't really get who Jesus was. But at the same time, we have to be careful we don't sort of miss what's going on here, right? Now in John 13:27, it says, this is with Jesus and Judas and John. Remember John, Peter says to John, ask the Lord what's going on. Who is it? Who's going to betray him? Whatever. After Jesus says something to him, to John, it says that after the morsel, Satan had then entered into him. Therefore, Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now, this is just before the Passover. This is the night before the Passover, right? So, Jesus, now, okay, so here we have Satan entering into him. So we know that he's not a believer, hasn't got the Holy Spirit indwelling him, because Satan can't enter into a believer's spirit, because he's sealed by the Spirit once you are saved. So this is how you know that Judas wasn't a saved believer. And of course, the indwelling of the Spirit didn't occur till after Pentecost, just a side point. But this point about Satan actually comes up earlier in John chapter 13, verse 3, I think. Have a look there, but you'll see now he's entered into Judas. Does that mean he's lost his faculties, his mental faculties? I don't know. This is where I'm a little bit... I would say that you still have the ability to make a decision. He still had the ability to say no to Satan. I don't think where it's that cut and dry, where he's now possessed and he had no way to stop himself, right? I don't think that is true. I think it's like we as a believer, we have the indwelling Spirit, but we can also walk in the flesh, right? We can also make decisions that have a consequence if we walk in the flesh, or we can choose to make a decision that is spiritual and walk in the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit, which we should, because we are always led by the Spirit. So this is why I think, even though Satan entered into him, he could have still resisted Satan, So I think he was influenced by Satan, and of course it wouldn't have been easy, but I think he could have said no. However, I think, like James says, sometimes it's those desires, James 1:13, I think it is. Those desires are inbuilt in us, or are we allowing that? And I think Satan just put more fuel on the fire for this guy, right? He was already there. He's already had it in his mind. I think that's right. I think John 3:13 says he already had it in his head to betray him. So Satan just sort of egged him on. And Jesus just says, look, whatever you're going to do it now. Do it quickly. Going against the opportune time, which was not during the festival. Now, this is in the festival period. So think about that. What on earth is going on? So these prophetic statements were made long in advance. Now, Jesus can't control these events. What Judas does or doesn't do, right? He can't control them. So the chief priests and the elders, driven by fear and envy, they hatch a plot to seize Jesus, as we know, secretly, and put him to death. However, they recognise that carrying out that scheme during the Passover festival would risk causing a public uprising due to the large number of pilgrims in Jerusalem and who were following Jesus. So I think Judas' involvement is very, very important. They accept it, as we were saying, and finding the right moment to betray Jesus. However, as I said, they were trying to avoid the festival period. Now, what Jesus does by telling Judas to do that during the Last Supper is basically spurs him on as well. Well, if you're going to do it, do it. We know that Jesus, astutely revealed that one of his disciples would betray him, and we know that it's interesting. A lot of when Jesus said that, a lot of the disciples said, "Is it I? Is it I?" Right? Because they couldn't understand who could it be. They wouldn't have considered Judas because he was treasured, he was favored, he was sitting next to Jesus. He was a favored amongst them. Different, I think maybe if Matthew was a treasurer, maybe they thought of Matthew, right? And I think maybe now, looking back, maybe Jesus could see that Matthew would have been a compromised position because of his previous role as a tax collector. I don't know. I'm just connecting my own dots here. However, Judas remained silent, right, when he said that. I'm sort of going back into the account. And of course, Jesus, after he dipped his hand in the same bowl as the account goes, there was just a slight nudge by Jesus. And Judas, I think, would have got startled a little bit. He stayed a little bit after he told him. I think he realized that he was caught out, I believe, in his treachery by the Messiah. And I think that caught him out. And I think by saying do it and do it quickly, he sort of gave, released Judas from his maybe hesitation, and that sort of propelled him toward the fulfillment in this dark period of his own life. And I think that's why he probably stayed back a little bit. But I think by Jesus saying do it quickly, I think he realized he got caught, he knew it, and he just left. Now, what is the thing with all this? Well, it went contrary to the religious leaders' plans. This whole events, these whole strategic planning, whatever they had in their mind, and you can imagine how they were secretly plotting to get him, etc., with Judas as well. Now it's gone backwards. Judas disregards their instruction to betray Jesus at a more opportune time outside the festival period. Instead, he succumbed to the pressure of his own self, of his own, I don't know, whatever, for whatever reason. And he set in motion a series of events that would lead to the crucifixion during the Passover. Well, I think Jesus is the first lamb of the Passover, or the first hour when Jesus gets crucified is when the Passover was beginning. And I think it's in line because during the season, that time of season with the Passover, the first lamb is always the one without blemish, right? So I think, what do we see here? What do we see? We see something quite interesting, right? By orchestrating his own betrayal, Jesus ensured that Jerusalem was teeming with the witnesses during the festival. Although he never wanted to go down this path, it was inevitable. It was going to happen, and so he allowed. He wasn't walking away from it. He allowed the chips fall wherever they may go, and they just happened to fall exactly as was prophesied. We know that Jesus was crucified, and then he was resurrected, and this would be then witnessed by many people, including 500, who later testified to seeing Jesus Christ in 1 Corinthians 15. So this provided a solid foundation to spread the grace gospel throughout the world. So even in the midst of mockery, the religious leaders unwittingly spoke a prophetic jest. They challenged Jesus to come down from the cross, declaring that they would believe in him if he did so. Remarkably, though, through the power of redemption, many priests did come to believe in Jesus after his resurrection. So even though there was all this happening, you can see God's love in the love of Christ. How he said, Father, forgive them. Even with all this happening to him, personally being attacked, ridiculed, slapped, hurt, injured. We know what he went through. Um, I think I might just leave it at there. I was going to include a couple of accounts in Acts, but I think I might leave it. What's the conclusion? And I'll bring these other points out in other videos. Well, these prophetic statements that were made, I guess I can use the illustration of a divine game of chess, although it's not like that, but it's sort of like that, And you got these human plans are interweaving with God's prophetic statements, and humans are trying to do this and do that, conspire to betray Jesus, and this conspiracy, to betray Jesus shows us the profound wisdom and redemptive power of God. Jesus, with a word to Judas, and allowing Judas to make a move, if you like, on this game, ensuring that his crucifixion was going to take place at the appropriate time, and the resurrection would be witnessed by many. And Jesus, had to fulfill the law. They were trying to prevent that. He already passed all examinations, right? Every single test he went through over those 3.5 years, from the desert to the crucifixion, and the questions in chapters 23, I think it is, in Matthew chapter 22 or 23. Can't remember, but they loaded him up with questions. They tried to get him in every angle. They couldn't. And then Satan throws this last ditch, let's put him through a physical test, and then betrayal test, right? His friends betrayed him. It's nothing worse than your friends betraying you, right? And cheating on you and whatever. And this is what was going on, and throwing you and throwing you to the wolves. That's what they did. Okay? And that can break a human. That alone can break a human, where you feel like you're not loved and you've been betrayed, right? This is all happening to Jesus, and I think this is part of the enemy's plan. I don't think they wanted it to happen during the Passover. As it turns out, they had it was beyond. This is what I mean. It was beyond their control. It was even beyond. They didn't realize, because there was a veil covering their eyes, that they were fulfilling prophetic statements made centuries in advance. They were oblivious to the consequences of their actions, unwittingly contributed to God's plan of salvation. Even in the darkest moments of betrayal, God's redemptive superpowers triumph, offering forgiveness and eternal life to all who believe in Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Friends, that's my concluding part on this thought on this topic. Let me know the Divine Chessboard, Unraveling the Betrayal of Jesus. And next time we're going to go into a little bit more into these sort of topics, because we want to know Jesus, right? And because we talk on so many different, trying to prove different falsehoods and teachings and stuff like that, sometimes just by going back into the life. Now, remember, Jesus is under a covenant, but it really shows to me that he is the Messiah. He is our Lord. And he shows his love, even to his enemies, where he allowed them to do what they were going to do, but he still was loving towards them. And that's really he's just a remarkable person. He is love to me. He is grace personified. Next week we might look at some of the characters: Caiaphas, Annas, Pilate, and Herod. Maybe we might have a look at them and see what we can learn from these characters in our own walk in life. We can glean something, the way Jesus interacted with them in his trials, this kangaroo court, right? We can learn a lot how Jesus dealt with them, and the type of personalities that are attacking us today, because they represent a good area, a wide area of the world that is attacking us, attacking a believer today. So maybe we can do that. All right, guys, have a great day, and let me know what you think on this video. See you later.